Hello everyone and welcome to our second video in the QDU Academy series for the Gold Coast Primary School competition. Today we're going to be talking about our second debate for the program, which is about that fairy tales set us up for disappointment. Today in this session we'll be covering a few key topics. Firstly, we will do a reflection on debate 1. Secondly, we'll be talking about the overview of the context for our second debate. After that, we'll talk about how to set up this debate properly. Finally, after that, we'll be brainstorming some points, and then finally, we'll move on to some tips on the debate. Firstly, I wanted to start off with a reflection. A big congratulations to all of our students who have had their first debate now, and best of luck for your preparations to all the teams who are yet to complete their first debate due to a postponement. It's really important as you move through the competition to get into the practice of reflecting on your debates, for a few key reasons. Firstly, it's important to make sure that you're getting the most out of the experience and that you're learning from your experiences. Secondly, it's important to think about what you did well and what you enjoyed about the activity so that the focus is on the skills that you're developing and the positive experience you're having rather than just about winning and losing. And finally, it's also important to reflect to see where you might be able to get some assistance to move forward in the future. As we move through these questions, I want you to think about your experience either as a speaker in the debate, as a timekeeper, chairperson, or maybe even a spectator. If you haven't had your debate yet, think about the program so far and what the process of preparing for the debate has been like. I'll talk through these questions in more detail now to give you a few ideas about what to think about. The first question is, what did I learn? You might want to think about if you learnt something new about the topic itself, maybe the process of researching for it taught you something new. You might have learnt a new debating skill. As most people were new to debating, I suspect quite a few of you will have learnt new skills. You may have learnt a new lesson about teamwork through the process of preparing for the debate. Pause the video now and write down some thoughts about what you've learnt from the debating so far to share with your team members. The second question is, what did I enjoy? This question is important as it encourages you to reflect on what the positive parts of the experience were, even if you did have moments in the debate that were stressful or disappointing. You might like to think about whether you enjoyed speaking at the debate, or whether you enjoyed writing your speech, or working as a team. This can also be helpful as it can help you think about what role you'd like to play in the team moving forward. Maybe you didn't enjoy speaking that much, but you really enjoyed researching, so that you could be a team member who helps your team prepare for the debates moving forward. Or maybe you really enjoyed spectating, but you'd like to have a go speaking next time. Pause this video now and write down some of the ideas about what you enjoyed from this debate. The next question is, what did I do well? It is really important to celebrate your achievements, particularly as debating can be challenging at times. Also, it's important to reflect on what you did well to ensure that you do it again next time. You might like to ask questions such as, did you try rebuttal? Had your arguments been well researched? Did you speak to the full 4 minutes of time? Did you have great eye contact? Now pause the video and write down what you think you did well, or potentially what you think your team members did well, so you can congratulate them on this and encourage them for next time. The next question is, what can I improve? This question is vital as it encourages you to reflect on what might have been your weaker points in the debate or what you're looking forward to improving for next time so that you can get the appropriate assistance or encourage yourself to be mindful of this. Ask yourself questions like, did the adjudicator give you any feedback? Did your teacher make any suggestions? Or is there anything that you noticed in the debate that you'd love to work on for next time? Pause the video now and write down your ideas. Our final question is, what don't I understand? Do you have any questions, or was there any part of the debate that was confusing to you? Is there any feedback that you got which just didn't make sense? Many of you are brand new to debating, and there might be moments in the debate that didn't make sense to you or that you'd like to learn more about. Now take the opportunity to write down anything that you're unsure about so you can take this to your teacher, ask your adjudicator for a better explanation, or send an email through and we can address this question for you. Well, congratulations to everyone again on their first debate, or good luck in your preparations so far. Now we're going to move on from reflection and talk about preparations for debate number 2. To start you off with considering the context for this debate, I have a video that is linked in the description that goes through an explanation of what a fairy tale is, and that was viewed in will be viewed in the live session this afternoon. Pause this video and take a moment to watch the context video. Did you know that in different cultures and languages, fairy tales start in different ways and follow different formats? In English, most fairy tales start with once upon a time. But in the Philippines, fairy tales often start with in the first of times. In Poland, they generally begin with beyond 7 mountains, beyond 7 forests. And in Korean, they start with once, in the old days when tigers smoked. Whereas in Tamil, they typically begin with in that only place. It's interesting to think about how fairy tales can differ across different cultures. Pause this video and have a think about whether you know of any fairy tales from different cultures and how they might differ from place to place. Thinking about how fairy tales are different across different cultures will be helpful for our next activity, which is about defining the topic. To start with defining a topic, it's important to think about what makes a fairy tale a fairy tale. Pause this video now and see if you can brainstorm 5 different fairy tales. Once you have completed this activity, the next activity is to brainstorm 3 to 5 elements which make fairy tales unique. You might like to think about the kind of characters that typically appear in fairy tales, the setting where fairy tales take place, the typical plot that they follow, whether they have a purpose, or there is a key message across them. It's really important to think clearly about how we define fairy tales, as they're something that many of us are familiar with, but it's hard to pin down exactly what makes a fairy tale a fairy tale. For this debate, it will be very helpful to have a good understanding of what a fairy tale is, and also this will help you think about characteristics that might prompt brainstorming for point ideas later. So pause the video now and see if you can think about 3 to 5 things that these kind of fairy tales that you've come up with as examples have in common that are unique to the genre of fairy tale. Now that you've done this, here are some examples that I came up with. So in fairy tales, you often have common characters. There's usually a hero and a villain. There might be magical folks such as a fairy godmother, magical creatures like dragons. Fairy tales may have princes and princesses, or things like talking animals. Fairy tales are often set in a castle or an old village or dark forest. And fairy tales often follow a common plot. I thought of 2 main plots that fairy tales often follow. The first one is where the hero meets a challenge, overcomes that challenge, and lives happily ever after. And the second one that I could think of was where the main character gets some advice, ignores that advice, and then faces a negative consequence. Which leads into the purpose behind many fairy tales. Fairy tales typically exist to educate about morality, or to give a cautionary tale to warn people against taking certain courses of action. And in some cases, fairy tales exist just to entertain. There are common messages across many fairy tales, such as be careful who you trust, which comes into play in things like Little Red Riding Hood. Another message is the message of don't judge a book by its cover, which is relevant in The Beauty and the Beast and The Ugly Duckling. The message of listen to adults or listen to your elders is also a common message, such as when Little Red Riding Hood was told to stay on the path. Another message is don't lie, which is relevant in The Boy Who Cried Wolf. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how fairy tales have changed over time and what your opinion on this is. In many cultures, fairy tales began as stories passed down orally from women. When European fairy tale authors first started to write down fairy tales, female authors actually outnumbered male authors, even though some of the most prominent fairy tale authors now, such as Hans Christian Andersen, are men. I've got a few pictures on the PowerPoint here which give some examples of different fairy tales. The first picture here is an illustration from Beauty and the Beast in 1913. However, in modern Australia, many children grow up watching fairy tales which include Disney princesses. Another movie that you might be familiar with is Shrek, which samples from many different fairy tale genres to create an entirely new modern story. The original Disney princesses, such as Snow White and Cinderella, are much-loved icons, but have faced some criticism in recent years, as some people say they promote a non-inclusive view and they might have a stereotype view of women. In recent years, this has contributed to Disney producing a new kind of movie, such as Moana, which is a story that tells a modern story based in Polynesian legend and custom. Now, pause this video and have a think. Do you think that fairy tales have changed over time? And can we call modern stories, like Moana or Shrek, fairy tales? Do they fall within the scope of this debate? Have a think about this now. Now that we've talked about what a fairy tale is, it's time to write down your definition for the topic. So write down a definition that says, we define the topic as fairy tales, which are, this is where you insert your definition of fairy tales, and set us up for disappointment, which means fairy tales and set us up for disappointment are the two key elements of this topic, and this sentence will help form the foundation for the definition that you have in the debate. It's important to define the topic as the affirmative team, but even if you're the negative team, it can still be really helpful to have a clear understanding of what the definition is. Fantastic. Now that you've defined your topic, we're going to talk about criteria. So criteria in a debate go in what we call criteria or empirical debates. Criteria debates are different from what the debate you had in the first round, which is called a should or policy debate, where we were actively banning something. In this case, we're not talking about doing something. It is a debate about how you will judge or compare two things. So for example, we have the topic that books are better than movies, or in our case, that fairy tales set us up for disappointment. In this debate, if you were to have criteria for how you're going to judge whether fairy tales set us up for disappointment, you might like to consider how fairy tales prepare people for the real world or give life skills. In this debate, it's not necessarily vital to have criteria, but it's worth thinking about the fact that this second round debate is a different kind of debate from the first round, and that you will not need a model. Fantastic. Now we're going to move on to brainstorming point ideas. If you're doing this session by yourself, pause the video now and write down as many ideas as you can for the affirmative team. Think about what is the purpose of fairy tales and what message do they send. Then, after you've done this, pause the video again and challenge yourself to write down as many ideas in, say, 3 to 5 minutes as you can for the negative team. You can bring these ideas to your next team meeting, and it will be helpful to have considered the debate from both perspectives. If you're taking this session with a group of students, you might like to work in groups and swap ideas as you're going through. Another reminder about structuring your argument, there's a few key elements that go into our speeches that you're all probably aware of, which is your point, explanation, example, and the link to the topic. The most important takeaway from this is that it's really important to give an explanation for your reasoning before you give the example. So in these speeches, do not just rely on your wonderful examples that you've researched, but make sure that you're explaining things clearly and use the example to support your argument rather than just make the argument. To finish up, we'll have some helpful hints. The first of these tips is to remember that this is not a should debate, and you won't need a model. Instead, the focus is on proving whether fairy tales are disappointing or not. The second tip is to draw examples from fairy tales that you've grown up with or use research to find more evidence to support your case. It can be helpful to either talk to friends and family about different fairy tales they might know, to jump on the internet, or go to your library and see if you can find any fairy tale books. This can be helpful as the fairy tales you've grown up with might send one kind of message, but you might be able to find a more diverse mix of fairy tales that send different messages, which can help come up with more examples for your debate. And the final tip is that remember that this debate is not about whether fairy tales are good or bad, but is about specifically whether they set us up for disappointment in life. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch by emailing training@qdu.org.au or jump on our YouTube channel and check out some of our other debates and our other videos, which will help give you some more tips on debating. Thank you everyone for tuning in and best of luck for your second debate of the competition.